Hey, how's it going? Welcome back to Black Cat. Today we're going to be doing a quick little video on the Heresy Designs AUG conversion kit, specifically the 16.3 inch 556 conversion. So we'll start with a quick little description of what the actual product is. It is essentially a 16-inch barrel for the Steyr AUG that comes with an adjustable gas block here, as well as these 4 Picatinny sections out front here. Ignore these rail covers and this vertical foregrip. That is not what the kit comes with. So essentially what this kit does is it fixes 2 of the major issues that a lot of people have with the Steyr AUG, that being rail space out front and an adjustable gas block, as the regular Steyr AUG is not a terribly pleasant firearm to use with a suppressor. And it does this all for just about $400. So the Heresy Designs kit, you can see here this adjustable gas port. Essentially it is a 3-position gas port now versus the 2-position, technically 3, that the stock Steyr AUG A3 M1 is. And what it changes it to is you now have this sort of bottom port here. You can sort of see that with this little mark I've made on it there. That does not come from the factory like that. That is something that I added just for my sort of help, I guess, my aid, if you will. And you can see these 3 sort of positions here. That one there, the top one, middle, bottom one there, and this little line on the actual plug itself that I added just so I can know which one it is currently set to. So the bottom one here, the one that's sort of marked with this A, that's the most open gas setting. I would say that's about comparable in terms of how it feels to the stock Steyr AUG gas setting. And that one is advertised by Heresy Designs to just be your standard, like, hey, you don't have a suppressor, run it in this setting. Yeah, you can do that if you want. However, as we'll sort of discuss further on, it's not really necessary, and it's kind of doesn't really matter. The second one here that I've marked with these 2 ones, sort of like a 2 Roman numeral, this is their position that they advertise for low back pressure cans. So think like a 556K or a like a Velos. And this one here works perfectly fine with a suppressor. However, it also works, as I found, perfectly fine without a suppressor. And it is a much more pleasant experience than this bottom position here. So if you're just shooting this without a suppressor, I would avoid this bottom one altogether and use that middle one there. And then finally, this top one here is their most restrictive gas setting. And they say that this one, they being Heresy Designs, is specifically for high pressure cans. Think something like a Polo K or a, oh, hello George, or a Surefire RC2. This one works fine with a low back pressure can that I've been using. So kind of use that, I guess. It's much more pleasant than this one here, like noticeably. And then also, interestingly enough, it works fine without a suppressor. So the most pleasant unsuppressed shooting experience is in the most restrictive gas setting. However, as with all gas settings, if you tune it down and you're trying to get that absolute sort of perfect, like most pleasant experience, as with all adjustable gas blocks, by tuning it down to the absolute minimum amount of gas, you're sort of opening yourself up to potentially running into some reliability issues as the gun starts to get a little more clogged up. One sort of issue with this gas port, this gas setting as well, and this is kind of an issue with all adjustable gas blocks, is this will eventually get carbon locked. So I found that after about 150 rounds, I personally was not able to, by hand, move and adjust this gas port. I had to use a pair of pliers, sort of just crimp down on it like that, pull up, and then using that extra leverage, that's how I could adjust that. So keep that in mind. You might need a tool to adjust this as it gets a bit more carbon locked. So probably if you're shooting it unsuppressed, probably just keep that in that middle spot right there, and you'll be perfectly fine. So now with all the praise out of the way, let's start to talk about some of the issues that I have with this. And sort of the main issue is kind of a feature, I guess, of the AUG, that being this is actually, if I can get this to go, a quick release barrel. So there's naturally going to be a slightly more loose fitting fitment between the barrel and the actual receiver of the AUG, which doesn't necessarily lend itself towards very high levels of accuracy. I've found that both with this barrel as well as, you can see sort of here, this is the stock Steyr AUG barrel. I have it in a bag over here. Just shooting this cheap Fiocchi 55 grain 5.56, I'm getting about 2-inch groups at 100 yards, which is pretty respectable. That's about as much as you could ask for cheap ammo and not the most mechanically accurate rifle of all time. However, the issue is that fitment. And this is an issue with the regular Steyr AUG, and I don't know if you can hear it. I'm gonna hold this upper receiver here. But the barrel here and the gas block are wiggling around and rattling, especially compared with this upper receiver that it's supposed to be attached to. It sort of just fits in there roughly tight enough. So what that means is, hey, like depending on how you're holding this or how you're loading, loading being how you're leaning into or applying weight to the front of this rail here, you're going to see a shift in the actual accuracy of the rifle. So I, after hearing this, decided to test this out for myself. So I took a bipod here and I zeroed it at 40 yards just because that's a nice easy distance for me to use at my local range. And I got a zero with it with the bipod, and I loaded the majority of my weight onto the bipod. And I shot a group, got about an inch or so group at 40 yards, and cool, called it a day. Then took the bipod off, and then because this rail section here is separate from the actual plastic of the AUG receiver set here, or I guess receiver here, placed the bottom here, used that as my support. So the barrel was no longer loaded. There was no longer my weight leaning into it, and shot a second group. And I ended up running into some accuracy issues. So what I found was at roughly 40 yards, I got about 1.5 inch spread between my groups with the barrel loaded and the barrel unloaded. And you can see here, this top group here, that's my group when I've loaded the barrel. So that's what my rifle is zeroed for at that distance. And then you can see the lower group here, the lower 5-shot group, that is with the barrel unloaded. So why is this important? Well, right off the rip, if you're trying to shoot accurate groups, that's not that great. Having about 1.5 inch vertical spread, depending on how you load the barrel at 40 yards, is going to lead at 100 yards, roughly a 3.75 inch spread to that vertical spread there. So what you run into, depending on how you load or unload the barrel, is at 100 yards, you end up with a 2-inch wide group and a roughly 5.75 inch vertical spread to your groups. How I got that number there is I take the 2-inch vertical spread, which it would be normally without having any issues loading the barrel, 3.75 inch spread plus your 2-inch normal or nominal vertical spread. And then hopefully this little diagram sort of makes a bit more sense there. Out to 200 yards, you have, keeping that same 2 MOA roughly, you have a 4-inch wide group. However, now you're 11.5 inches of vertical spread. That is kind of getting ridiculous there. Keep in mind, a IPSC target is only 30 inches tall. So if you're aiming at the exact center of that IPSC target, pushing out towards 200 yards, you're running into the risk of potentially having your rounds falling off the bottom of the plate, depending on how poorly you're aiming. But what really sort of gets me is when you push out to 300 yards, the math, you still keep in that 6-inch wide group. However, now your vertical spread goes to 17.25 inches, which is, if you're aiming dead center, depending on how you load that barrel, you could be putting rounds clear off the bottom of that target there. So some of you might be like, hey, like that doesn't really matter. I'm going to zero with the barrel loaded. And then at those distances, anything, I would say probably more than 100-yard shot, you're probably going to be shooting supported in some way, and you should be able to load that barrel to a certain extent. So keeping that in mind, you can probably bring your accuracy back down to those lower numbers, roughly like getting closer to like, you keep that, let's say at 300 yards, that 6-inch wide spread, and you're getting close to about that 6-inch vertical spread at those distances because you're replicating similar conditions to when you actually zeroed the rifle. My issue with this all, and the reason that I'm probably not going to stick with having this in my AUG, is that sort of margin of error is there are better solutions to it out there. I'm not going to say there's definitely, I will say I don't think that there's any cheaper options for sure. And going from just a regular stock Steyr AUG going to this, because you're keeping those same sort of issues present throughout the whole system, I would say that there's no reason not to do that. Like for $400-ish, that's a pretty sweet deal. However, there are already kind of, if you're willing to spend a bit more money and then maybe put a bit of sweat into it, there's this other option here, this being the A3M2 rail that Steyr themselves makes. You can sort of see here that I've had to do some slight Dremel work, some gunsmithing, if you will, to make this rail actually fit onto the A3M1 receiver. So if you don't want to do that, this is not the way that works for you. You're kind of going to be stuck dealing with this here. However, what you can see here is the rail section is actually attached to the receiver and doesn't actually touch the barrel at all like the barrel in the Heresy Designs one does. So that solves that issue right off the rip of the accuracy, as well as adding that additional rail space to the front of the AUG. The other sort of solution that I have here, I said sort of solution. The other solution I have here is this is a gas plug that is sold by Steyr themselves, and this is a suppressor gas plug. So that one is also technically adjustable. Like the Heresy Design one, you can't do it by hand once it starts to carbon lock. So that's kind of not that big of a deal, if you will. And most importantly, hello, George. Come on, get out of here. Just like the Heresy Designs gas ports there, you have an adversed, and then you have your suppressed setting here, and the suppressed gas setting works without a suppressor even attached. So you can leave it in that suppressed gas setting and not really have to worry about, hey, is this going to run properly if I don't have my suppressor on it? Like some guns won't lock back properly, the bolt won't hold back on an empty mag because it just doesn't have enough gas in the system. So this system will work. And on top of that, I will say, I do actually think that this setting is a nicer, more pleasant experience than even the tightest, most restrictive one on the Heresy Designs. So if all those things with the Heresy design sort of matter to you and you don't really want that decrease in accuracy, roughly, I believe $300-ish, maybe $400-ish off of Steyr's site here. Take a little Dremel. If you have an A3M2, drop that straight on. Cool, lucky you. If you have an M1 like me, got to get that Dremel out, make that fit there. And then I believe this was about an $80 or $90 gas plug from Steyr themselves. So kind of the same ballpark in terms of actual price. 400-ish, 500-ish. So kind of up in the air what you want to do. So anyways, thanks for watching my video. This is just a quick little talk on some stuff that I've been working on. I've spent quite a bit of money, as you can sort of see here, and I figured that some other people might be looking to modernize an AUG, and hopefully this can kind of help save you some money or help drive you in a certain direction for how you spend that money. But anyways, have a good night.